Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. So today we're going to continue our mini-series on Emerson, and we're going to talk about the 1895 series. So before we get into that, if you want to get more behind-the-scenes content that is not available publicly, patreon.com/dspiffy is your place. It's about the cost of a single cup of coffee or latte per month. You get all kinds of behind-the-scenes footage that for whatever reason is not public, and learn a lot more information there. So, let's get into it. We just did a very lengthy video about Emerson's overall timeline, chronicling the Heat Fan, aka the Blender Fan, aka the Universal series, aka the Emerson old-time Casablanca, etc., from the 60s all the way until its last inception in the early 2000s. And we took a pit stop along some other models along the way, including the 1895 series. We did not go into detail about the 1895 series because we're going to do that here. Before we get started, I want to shout out a special thanks to the Neon Fan Company because they provided a lot of this information. Also, I think the owner of the Neon Fan Company, Skylar, is probably the fan collector that is the most interested in the 1895 series out of anybody. I don't know anybody that loves 1895s more than him. If you think you love 1895s more than him, please say so in the comments. I want to get to the bottom of this because I don't think I know anybody more. By the way, it's completely coincidental that I'm wearing neon glasses. I just pulled out a pair at random and I love it. This is awesome. So big shout out to the Neon Fan Company. Let's talk about the 1895 series. And to do that, we're going to have to go 1 year back in time, because while the 1895 series started in 83, we're going to go back to 1982. 1982 was the first appearance of KB55 motors, primarily in Sears. Also, 1982 was the first appearance of 4-speed fans. They were sold in Sears alongside variable speed. One thing that's interesting is if you look at the Sears catalog for the fans that were 4-speed in 82, it does not clarify whether they were a 4-speed knob or a 4-speed pull chain. And there's reason to believe it could be either. We'll elaborate on that a little bit as we go forward. So, 83 is our big year for the 1895 series. Emerson patented the KB55, which is the motor that made the 1895 series possible. The 1895 series is introduced. The first advertisements are in Dan's Fan City in January. Ball socket is introduced. The 1895 series follows a model number like this. We talked a lot about model numbers in the previous video. And this, for the 1895 series, they start with CF4, and then there's another digit that denotes the style, and then 52 or 42 or whatever the size is, 36, and then several more digits that denote the finish, the blades, etc., and the revision. So in my notes here, I have them listed as CF4X for, whatever style, 52XXX. So if I say X going forward as I'm reading my notes, that's what I mean. So, but they start with CF4, and then the last two digits are usually the revision code, and we'll get into that. So the 4 denotes the 1895 series. We talked about that. The rest of the numbers denote style, size, blade type, finish, revision. We talked about that. The first generation of the 1895 series from 1983. It has plate and blades with flat ends that are left over from designers. It has a flat switch cap, much like the Casablanca Classic. In fact, it uses basically the same switch housing as the Casablanca Classic. The earliest ones were likely 4-speed. Most of them were 4-speed. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. They have the tapered cast switch housing, just like the Casablanca Classic. The blender canopy, which we also call the tuna can canopy. The reverse switch is in the top of the housing. They have a little wooden ball in the pull chain, again, much like the Casablanca Classic. The finish is usually smooth. Technically, they are 54-inch fans, even though the model number denotes 52-inch, and I've seen some advertisements that advertise them as 56-inch. So there's a little ambiguity there, but the model number denotes them as a 52-inch fan. The earliest ones have those stepped blade irons that I love and a notched flywheel. If you look at the flywheel on the first few generations of the 1895 series, they have a notch in the center for the blade arms to fit. Later flywheels don't have that. Some early versions have a 3-speed knob, and if you go to the Montgomery Ward's catalog, you can see that on my YouTube channel, among other places. You can see pictures of that. Also, if you go to the Sears catalog, some of their versions have the 3-speed knob pictured. I've seen the 3-speed knob Sears version in the flesh. I have not seen the Montgomery Ward version, which is the more standard 1895 version. I have reason to believe it exists. I'd love to find one. If you've ever seen one, tell me more. As we alluded to just now, the 1895 series was also introduced in the Sears catalog as the turn of the century, as most of the Sears fans were called. The Sears versions had different vents and a different sideband. Emerson's first remote control fan was an 1895 variation introduced for Sears in 1983. The Sears versions are all antique brass and or the ornate remote version, according to Art. All the other Sears versions in 83 are still the dropped flywheel turn of the century version that predated the 1895 series. So, if the catalog art is correct, if you ordered a fan from Sears in 83, if you ordered ornate remote control or antique brass plain, you got an 1895 variation. If you ordered any other finish combination, you got the older K55 version. The early versions of the KB55 have a bottom cover over the windings, and the reason that is because they were also used in designers and plastic turn-of-the-century fans, in which case they have the dropped flywheel and the windings would be exposed to the naked eye. So they just have a plastic cover on them to look more decorative. I love these fans. You've heard me talk about them. The KB55 designers are one of my favorite variations. So that's 83. That's the introductory year. Let's move forward and talk about 84. This is the first year for Northwind imports. We're going to have a whole separate video on Northwind, but the reason that is significant is because some of the parts for the 1895 series are imported. We're going to talk about that a little more. 84 brings us the second revision of the 1895 series, which means the model number ends in 02. The first revision, I believe, ended in 01. I'm not sure if it actually put that on the model number or if it was just implied. Whereas from 84 on, if you have the second revision, the model number ends in 02. So it's CF4 for 1895 series, X for ornate or plain or whatever, 52, or 42 or 36, XXXX02. So let's talk about what that second revision was. It was offered from the factory, not as a special order, with cane or stencil blades with pointed tips. You could actually get one unipacked with cane blades, which I want, by the way. Still 4-speed, still blender canopy. By the way, there is a theory that is yet to be disproven that if you get a 1895 series 52-inch with the blender canopy, other than the exceptions we've already talked about, like the knob and some of the Sears versions that were remote, etc., it will be 4-speed. So if you see just like a plain, that's not even a plain one, but you get the idea. You see a plain 1895 series 52-inch with the blender canopy and nothing else that makes it special, you should expect it to be 4-speed. The reverse switch was still on top. Now they had a metal Emerson fob on the pull chain. Textured finish was now prevalent. One thing I can't remember if I mentioned in the... I don't think I did remember to mention it in the 83. The 83 and 84 both have a 1-amp motor. We're going to talk about motor changes a little later, but the 83 and 84 both have the same motor, which is a 1-amp motor. In 84, with the second generation, they now move to a stamped switch housing, and the rounded switch cap is introduced. But in 84, you could still get the flat switch cap and possibly even the cast switch housing, as they were using old parts. Both of them are still the 02 revision. Second revision, though, does have the smooth blade irons, and I don't believe that you can get an 02 with stepped blade irons. Also in 1984, the 42-inch version is introduced, and the model number for those is CF3X42X. And those have the reverse switch in the bottom. So it's interesting that at the same time, the larger fans have the reverse switch in the top, the smaller ones have it on the bottom. Don't know why that is, just another quirky little Emerson thing. Talk about the Sears versions, because again, they were always different than the versions sold in Montgomery Ward and elsewhere. The Sears versions are ornate remote, plain antique brass, plain brown, plain white, and brown and brass. In 84 is the first year where Lasco fans show up in Sears, and the ones that are pictured as Lasco are the ornate and variable speed and the plain polished brass. So again, if the catalog art is correct, and we never know for sure if it is, in 84, if you ordered an ornate remote-controlled fan, a plain brown, white, or antique brass fan, or a brown and brass fan, you got Emerson. If you ordered an ornate variable speed fan or a plain polished brass fan, you got Lasco. White fans, by the way, are not pictured. I've never seen a white and brass pictured until much later. We'll talk about that. 1985. Emerson shifts production to Tennessee and Taiwan. Previously, it was in South Carolina and Hong Kong. This is now what we're either calling the third revision or the fourth revision of the 1895 series. And let me explain. In 84, the model number suffix was 02. In 85, it is 04. That leads you to believe that there would be an 03, but we can't find any evidence that an 03 existed. So if an 03 did not exist, then this would be the third revision. If it did exist, then this would be the fourth revision. So I've got it in my notes as third/fourth. However you want to designate it. For now, we can just call it the third generation because there's no other changes that we know about that would have denoted that. So what does the 04 suffix mean? How do the fans change? Let's talk about it. What is this generation like? The blades are now thinner, and they are either plain or stencil. You can still special order cane, but it is no longer a unipack option. They still have the pointed tips. They're either 3-speed or remote control, and the remote control fans were sometimes offered with the Casablanca Classic style notched tips. This is the year of the generic canopy, 85. The reverse switch is moved to the switch housing, and here's the big change. In 85 on, the motor is now 1.15 amps. We've talked in the past about how the earliest 1895 series underperforms because the blades are too long for the irons, etc. But one of the things that I didn't know is that the motor was actually stepped up in terms of power in 85. So that's one other reason why the earlier 1895s are less powerful. Once you get to 85, they give it thinner blades and a more powerful motor. So this is actually going to be a better performing generation of fans. And I can't wait till we have one on the test rig and we can compare. Other thing that's changed about the motor is that the flywheel is now smooth. I don't know if there's nothing up here that shows it. But again, through 84, there was a notch in the flywheel for the blade arms to fit. As of 85, when the motor changes, the flywheel change, it is now a smooth flywheel. This is also the year the 36-inch 1895 series is introduced, and that model is CF30. Remember, the 0 is where I've denoted an X before, but since the 36-inch was only available in one finish, one style, that number is always a 0. So the model number for the 36 is CF3036, and no other suffix necessary because we know what finish it is. It's just W. They only offered it in white. Okay, the Masterpiece collection is introduced, which is the ornate sideband, remote control, and the notched blades. And that is the model number CF5X52X. And again, the X's are all finishes and suffixes and things like that. Also in 1985, Emerson patented their close mount kit. Talk about the Sears versions now. The Sears versions are brown, white, and brown and brass. The Lasco versions are ornate remote, ornate variable, antique brass, and polished brass. However, both Emerson and Lasco fans appear in the ads as antique brass. So if the catalog images are correct, and we know they might not be, in 1985, if you ordered a fan from Sears, if you ordered brown, white, brown and brass, or antique brass, you got Emerson. If you ordered ornate remote, ornate variable, antique brass again, or polished brass, you got Lasco. So again, if the catalog art is correct, if you ordered the antique brass fan, you were really playing roulette. You could get either. So again, that's if the catalog art is correct, and we have no way to prove whether it is or isn't. In 1986, Emerson refiled their KB55 patent, I assume, because they increased the power in the KB55 the year before. And when we talk about how poorly it is with solid-state controls, I also wonder, because not all 1895s that I've tested were quite as poorly as others, I wonder if that newer motor design actually plays better with solid-state. So that's something else we want to check when we get to... Actually, I have an Emerson, we'll talk about that model in a little bit, but I have a ball socket 1895 test video. I should go back and watch it and see how noisy the solid state is. So that's something I may do, you can do, post it in the comments. You know, see, you win a prize if you get it right. So, speaking of which, 1986 is the year they introduced the paddle fan. You may remember from the previous Emerson video, paddle fan was the name they gave to the shrouded blender with decorative options. They reused that name again, and all this is the same as the Masterpiece collection, but not ornate, not remote. So it's got the 3-piece housing instead of the 2-piece, top, bottom piece, and a sideband. It's got the notched arms, and that's the one. I have a white and brass one of those in a video that I was just about to talk about. The model number for the paddle fans is CF6X52XXXXX. The only Emerson fan that's pictured in the Sears catalog in 1986 is brown and brass. So if the catalog art is correct, if you order brown and brass in 86, you get Emerson. If you order anything else, you get Lasco. Okay, 1987. The only change in 87 is in the Sears catalog. There is no change in Emerson's literature or advertisements. In 1987, the Sears versions are brown and brass, which has been consistent up until now, and white and brass. And that is significant because this is the first time that a white and brass fan is pictured in the Emerson catalog, and it is an Emerson 1895 variation. Also making that interesting, we have never seen brown or white Lasco fans pictured in any Sears catalog ever, but we know they exist because we found the fans. So that is a clue that, in fact, the catalog art was not always correct. Okay, 1988. Production shifts again. We don't actually know where they shifted it. There's a legal article on the web that talks about all the possibilities of where they were going to shift the production to. As of right now, the parts production was in Taiwan and there was assembly in the U.S. And the factory that they were using in Taiwan was a small factory, kind of like Bob Gould going to Chow. And so the options in 88 for where they were going to ship their production to were a larger factory in Taiwan, back to making everything in the U.S., or making everything in Mexico, including the motors. We don't actually know where they shifted to. If you have an 1895 series from 88 or 89, and you can look and see where it says it's made, that might solve the mystery. It might not, because sometimes those tags aren't updated. But we know they shifted production again in 88 because there's an article from 87 talking about, we're going to do it, where are we going to go? Okay, so also in 88, the 1895 is still the 04 suffix, but we know they did in fact shift production because there are changes in the fan despite the suffix staying the same. Finishes are now smooth again. Flat blade tips reappear. The blade arms are now much thinner and lighter and cheaper. Flywheel is still smooth, still has the 1.15 amp motor. The stamp parts in general are thinner and less dimensional, and the foam vent screen is now fabric instead of the foam that they were using back all the way to the Designers and before. The 36-inch and the Masterpiece versions are discontinued, but the paddle fan version remains for 88. This is also the last year of Emerson art in Sears catalogs. Okay, now let's go to 89. This is the first appearance of rubber flywheel Emersons. We talked about that in the previous video. The premium is reintroduced as a 5-blade fan with a rubber flywheel. The 1895 series is advertised as a 4-blade only fan with a new rubber flywheel, and in pictures and drawings it still looks like the old 1895 series. I've never seen one of these, but if they in fact exist, and one would assume that they do, they apparently look like a regular 1895, but under the irons, instead of the KB flywheel, is a rubber flywheel. So that's certainly possible. One thing I have seen in the wild, and it could be this version, but it doesn't match the pictures, is a version that has the 1895 housing flywheel that looks more like the KB, and irons that look more like Zephyr irons, or a little bit thinner irons. My suspicion is that is in fact the 88 version and not the 89. But no way to know until we find one actually dated 89, or somebody finds an actual rubber flywheel 1895 series that is 4-blade. We'll talk about the 5-blade versions in just a second. So, 1990 is the last year of the 1895 series. It is still being advertised in 1990. And in 1991, there is no more 1895 series. The Legend, which initially has Zephyr irons and is 5-blade, replaces the 1895. The Legend was not a part of the separate Air Design showroom lineup that we will talk about in the 90s Emerson video. Then in 1993, the 1895 series is reintroduced as a 5-blade fan, but otherwise looking very similar to this. And we know it does have we're back to the K55 and, rubber flywheel and all that. But it essentially looks like a 5-blade 1895 series. That was in 1993. In 1996, the Legend 2 replaces both the 1895 and the Legend 1. And that continues for several years, and 2000 is the last year of the Legend 2. The Legend 2 is discontinued in the year 2000. Well, did you know that there was that much information out there about the 1895 series? I sure didn't, and so I'm glad that we've done this video. I have learned a lot. And we have some new sponsors for this video specifically. First of all, as always, patreon.com/dspiffy if you want to learn more. But for this video specifically, we want to introduce Florida Fan Stick, which is now 69% longer and harder than regular fan stick. If you want to find out more about Florida Fan Stick, go to buyfanstickxxx.com. As always, thanks for watching, and as always, please continue to buy fan stick.